Good morning, everybody. We're gonna try some plein air landscape painting today. Can't really see you because the sun's really bright and it's super foggy out. If you can see behind me, kind of looks like Ireland, but that's fitting because, well, I'm Irish. But I'm gonna give you a little tutorial and see how this goes. Alrighty, so here's my setup. For those of you that are my art kids, when I sent home care packages for you, I gave you a bunch of acrylic paint, and that's what we're gonna use today. So there's my dirty palette all set up with acrylic. My acrylic might be a little bit different than the bottles I gave you, but it's the same thing. So same colors, same palette, same materials. I'm using a canvas board because since I'm painting outside, I wanted something a little more durable. So I'm kind of looking at this scene, the tree, that's gonna be my major player in this. But I've got some pretty mist going on. I've got some obviously wet cornfield that I don't know if it will ever dry, but just to kind of give you an idea, this is what I'm going to be looking at while I'm doing this little painting this morning. First thing I'm going to do, guys, is I'm going to throw the background for the sky in, and I'm going to keep it really, really light, staring into the sun right now, just because it is so foggy, but there's a lot of colors going on. It's really, really pale yellows, but a lot of blues, a lot of cool whites. So that's what I'm going to start with, is the background. I should show you guys, for my setup, even though I've got like brushes and water and all that kind of stuff, I'm going to be using quite a bit of water at times, which is right in here if you can see that, to thin my paint down. So when I start mixing, let's say, my sky color, and I know I'm probably going to need to use quite a bit more white. Again, when I'm mixing my paints, it's just like with oil paint, there's a little bit of that color that exists in all the colors, but if you put a little too much in, it might be a complete disaster, but that's okay. We can fix anything because it's paint. It's very forgiving. So as you're mixing your paint, because you're outside and because it's acrylic, I like keeping water handy just because, unlike oil paint, at least for me, it dries out horribly fast. As a side note for you guys, when you start, sometimes it helps to put a light background down and then add more color over top, because then you're still painting in that alla prima wet on wet style, or wet into wet style, which is what a lot of plein air landscape painters do when they're painting outside, so that this stays a very workable surface. So there's a little tip for you. I don't know if you can see this or not, but I'm trying to feather this more yellowish color that I have into this brighter, lighter blue color. I know it's really hard to see. Again, we're in the morning, it's really foggy out, but that wouldn't have been able to happen unless my surface was already wet underneath. So I hope that makes sense, but right in here, that's where I started fading this line so that we don't get ridges, because especially in the sky this morning, there's no ridges whatsoever. It's all very, very subtle fading from the very lightest spot, which is the sun, to where it's not quite so light, but still pretty light because it's foggy out. One more tip for the sky. Make sure you practice your rule of thirds. Super important in photography, super important in painting, in drawing. Rule of thirds, remember, you're splitting your canvas up into 3 places so that you don't have things directly in the middle, one way or the other way. Keeps it more interesting that way if you can shove things off to one side or the other. Continually and constantly look at your landscape, because one, it's always changing, so I am kind of painting pretty rapidly, or at least attempting to. I shouldn't say that. I am trying to paint very rapidly, but I'm also looking at where my ground is starting to emerge. I notice there's a darker line, and then it gets lighter for the sky, and then it starts to get just a hair darker before it gets up to where the sun is. So pay attention to these little subtle changes. Your landscape is going to look different than mine because the weather is constantly changing. Like I said, it just happens to be foggy here this morning, and it was kind of pretty, so that's why I like it. Alright. I know this is way too dark and probably way too blue. I'm putting it down right now so that I don't forget where I am looking for some of the darker areas way back out in the field, because, like I said, the landscape is ever changing and the sun is moving. So I can go back and kind of tweak this later. This is just a little subtle note for me to put down so I remember where everything is. Some little subtle tips for you guys. Sometimes I'm putting paint down and mixing it on the canvas instead of mixing it on my palette, just to see what it does. So don't be afraid to experiment a little bit. And also, I'm still dragging some of, in this case, there's still snow in a cornfield that was harvested last fall. So I am dragging some of that kind of coolish corn stalks, stumpage. I'm dragging it up, but I'm also bringing some of the snow with, just to kind of help with the sunlight bouncing off, and things are changing. I might lose my son here. If things change to the point where it's too much and I just can't remember everything, I'll take the photo that I took with my phone and I will finish this a little bit at a later date. We'll see how far I can get here before the sun completely goes away, but I'm gonna give it a good honest effort. What I'm doing here a little bit, because again I'm doing this quite rapidly, but I'm putting a little hint of snow way in the background, but I'm really lightening up my touch. Just like in the sky, I brush it very, very gently, very lightly, as soft a touch as you can. But then when I get towards the front where some of this heavier snow is, I'm laying the paint on pretty thick, and I'm just going to leave the texture because I kind of like it. If the texture bothers you, you can always smooth it down. Like this I think is sloppy, so that I would go and clean up. I'm going more for a look like this, and I'll bring some of those corn stalks back. But just to give a little hint of a texture, because I want to hurry up and throw in what I can, at least a silhouette of where I think this big pine tree is going to go in the front before I completely lose my light source and it moves a little bit too much higher. So as you can see, guys, this is getting really rough here, and it's very cold outside right now, or it's starting to feel like it, but my paint is still very wet because again I'm applying this really, really fast. So all I'm going to do is block in this tree for now, and then I will be bringing it inside to let it harden up a little bit so that I can actually put the true color over top of this, because as you can see right now, it's just mixing like crazy, and like I've been saying, my environment is changing quite rapidly, but the tree doesn't move as far as where it's growing. So I'm just going to block this in, and then I'm going to let it harden up a little bit and come back and finish it up. Little painter tip for you guys. Anytime you have old brushes, if you can, resist the urge to throw them out, because sometimes they make marks that are great. So this is a brush that I'm going to use for, I'm finding out the needles on my big pine tree that's out here, just because I like how it looks, and it's going to be somewhat impressionistic, but you're going to be able to tell that that's a pine tree by the time I get done adding all those little tiny details. Needles on the tree that are further in the back, since it's such a big tree, but there's still some depth and atmospheric perspective going on. I am going to use a different brush and not have so many defined needles as I will have just little clumps, little dark patches, so you'll be able to tell that they're needles and clumps of needles without seeing individual pieces like what I am getting with my old junker brush that's making really good marks. So that's what I'm going to do in addition to using the one brush, is I'm going to get a smaller brush but just put clumps to give the impression needles are there without having to put every single little stroke in. Alrighty, I wanted to show you guys what the finished product looked like after I got done tweaking it. So I consider this a quick little study for me. I would not consider this a long-term painting of any kind, but I wanted to show you guys just some of the techniques that I use when I do landscape paintings and when I do plein air. If I try this again, I'll try and show you something more with more variety in the sky. Again, this morning it was really foggy and misty, and so everything was very whitewashed, very light. That kept this painting very monochromatic, but I just wanted to show you some of the techniques that you can use and that you can play with when you're doing your own landscape painting. Okay, thanks. Bye. Forgot paper towel. There's a fly on the painting. Losing it. Ah. Oh, man. That's gonna become part of the tree, folks.